Hello and welcome to the program. Climate change remains the top security concern according to a new survey conducted by the Pew Research Center. But global warming is just one of many concerns. Terrorism, specifically from the Islamic extremist group, and cyberattacks are also seen by many as major security threats. Now, to talk more about this report, we are joined in the studio today by Ackermann. She's the head of climate department at the Center for Environmental Initiative, Ecoaction NGO. Hello, and thank you for joining us. So first question, a 26-nation survey conducted in the spring of 2018 shows that in 13 of these countries, people name climate change as the top international threat. What's your take on that? Is that like some more awareness? Is it a good sign? Is it a bad sign? What's your take on this?
Well, definitely, as we have climate change negotiations happening every single year for 25 years in a row now almost, right? It means that it actually is a global issue, and it's not only about 25 countries, it's actually about all the countries in the world which are touched in one way or another by climate change. It is a fact we can state that the global warming is happening, that we've already warmed up the globe, the Earth, up to 1 degree in comparison to the pre-industrial levels. And that's why the countries are now negotiating, well, they discuss what to do next, right? For as much as 25 years already. However, what is very important is that there is always the differentiation between those countries which are highly impacted by climate change. And here I'm talking about not something that would happen by the end of the century or tomorrow, but something that is already happening now. For example, there are some states, island states, which are now already disappearing under the water. So for them, it's a question of survival, how far climate change would go next. And of course, there are developed countries. There is US, there is EU, and others for whom it is urgent. However, it's not as urgent for the others who are just disappearing now, basically. So for them, again, it's a question of survival, and they're saying what we're going to do next, where actually our people will live when we have no land anymore, where our islands would not be there anymore. So
it's creating this concept of climate refugees, basically. And this idea, and so you see this idea of climate refugees and this phenomenon of climate refugees rising up this it's exactly the case, and of course there are climate refugees for different reasons, and the World Bank estimated that by already mid-century there could be hundreds of millions of climate refugees who would become refugees for different reasons. Again, that could be lack of water resources as a consequence of global warming, right? Sea level rise and so on. So there are multiple issues which are just accumulating now. Now, the developed countries obviously have their voice more heard than the less developed island, as you said, or countries that are disappearing now. How to make that let's say the territories that are disappearing now, how to have them heard on the table, on the same table than the developed countries here, because they're impacted now?
Well, of course, during the climate negotiations, they do get together and they represent one voice, basically. However, every single country has one voice. EU has actually only one voice, not each country has one.
Why is that?
For some reason, it happened like that, actually. I have no historical explanation. However, it's very actually interesting to say that all the EU countries have to agree on one single climate goal and say what they're going to do. So, of course, there are countries with high ambitions, low ambitions, and so on. And one very interesting fact is that although, of course, there are climate denials and the Western countries, very often we hear that maybe even climate change doesn't exist. We would not be pointing fingers who are saying that exactly.
Absolutely not, we're not.
However, I think that it was really amazing during the last climate negotiations. On one hand, there was representatives of the current presidency, right, who were definitely more protecting the rights of the fossil industry and definitely saying that climate change is not really that of an issue. However, also there were representatives of the states. And there was Arnold Schwarzenegger speaking as an ex-mayor of California, saying that I represent now, I don't remember now what it was, amount of, let's say, 20 states of the United States, which represent 70% of all the US emissions. And all of these states, we all together agree that we have to transform our energy sector, we have to reduce emissions to zero, and we are ready to do this, and we are already doing this now. No matter what is the state policy, no matter what the president would be saying, this is already happening now. So that means that the market is so in the world. We live in the 21st century in the end. It's not the 19th century, the time of the coal and so on. In the 21st century, it's the time for renewables, for the new economy, for IT, green energy, and so on. This is something that is happening now, developing, and so on. So with this, there is a hope that all of the countries actually have an opportunity to, well, be safe from climate change and actually improve their economy.
So apparently what you're saying is that it works better on the state level, so I would say a local initiative on some sort of proportion than just a government initiative here, like that every sort of step structure should just wake up and say, okay, that's enough and we have to do something here.
That's definitely something crucial here, and no matter what's happening at the state level, even in Ukraine, or maybe especially in Ukraine, no matter what government says, they could have any goals they could imagine. However, if all of these goals are not implemented on the local level, of course, nothing would happen. So the idea has to come down to the cities, to communities, and so on. And this is already happening now, I think. And there are many communities who are thinking now. Of course, in Ukraine, it's not about climate change, but it's about energy efficiency, for example. It's about their energy independence, be less dependent on oil, gas, whatever they don't have locally. And all of these things which are in the end making the climate policy as such also possible.
Which actually brings me, you began my next question about Ukraine. What are the main challenges? You talked about energy efficiency, and what are the main challenges that is facing Ukraine for the next, let's say, 10, 20, 30 years?
Well, definitely, I would want to start with energy efficiency first. And we say this is our first fuel, and the first fuel is the fuel that we don't consume. Ukraine remains most energy inefficient country in Europe, one of the most energy inefficient in the world. This has been the case for decades now. And that starts from the production of energy, from our coal power plants, whatever power plants, in the networks, on the way to the consumer, in our buildings. They are mostly energy inefficient. So it's the standards of how we build buildings, but of course, most of the buildings that we already have now, they are also in a very poor state. It's already been a question, of course, and I think since 2014 there were lots and lots of discussions, and also correct steps happened, and there were laws in place adopted by the parliament already, which should help to improve the situation with energy efficiency. Meaning to insulate the houses, to help the household associations, to do better. As well as to replace the fuel, the gas, with biofuel, for example, and so on. However, I would say that the scale is still too small. And although the laws are in place, they're still not implemented. There is still no energy efficiency fund, which we've been hearing about for already at least a few years, and so on. So there is still a lot to be done, so that at least our economy and our intensity of the economy would reach the levels of at least the neighboring Poland. We still have to do many steps. And only when we start with energy saving, energy efficiency, only then we could be talking about a transformation to renewable energy, like really large-scale transformations. But energy efficiency always comes first.
Which brings me to my next question. Recently, Norway signed agreements for investors to invest in Ukraine into renewable energy. Do you think it's a first step for something bigger? And do you think that in the end, Ukraine might become a major player of renewable energy in this region of the world, in Eastern Europe in general?
Well, I would say that when we compare the EU and Ukraine, would say in the middle with the Asian countries, and Ukraine definitely does much better than the countries of the East from Ukraine, and definitely much worse than the countries of the West. So there is always something to catch up. We can compare ourselves to whatever we prefer. However, renewable energy still makes very little in our energy mix. It's in electricity, it's just about 2% of electricity produced from renewables, which is still really small. However, there is now a boom of, we have many new wind power plants, really big capacities, big scale. Solar also is developing. Now there is a change of the support mechanism from the green tariffs to the feed-in tariffs to the green auctions and so on. I mean, this is all happening. It's good. There are lots of discussions discussions. There is even a movement now joined by the renewable associations, our singer Ruslana and some of the parliament members, to switch to 100% renewables, so like 100% renewables movement in Ukraine. And this is not only, we have been supporting this for years, you know, but as an NGO you can say, okay, that's fine. But when actually the business is saying that this is the correct way to go, and there are many supporters of this is great. But again, what we have ahead of us we have the nuclear power plants, coal power plants, which are absolutely old and have to be phased out very, very soon. So in the coming decades, we would have to replace them with something new. And for now, in the government plans, it's not really clear what we would be replacing them with. And from what I see, it's mostly saying, well, we probably would replace them with the same also nuclear units, with the same new thermal, also probably coal or gas, whatever capacities. So we are still a bit locked in the system of the fossils. So there is no real clear plan to say, no, we are on the way to transformation. We are transforming our energy system to clean energy. That I haven't heard from the government. However, many cities now, there are some cities which announced also they're going to be switching to 100% renewables by the mid-century. This is actually only 30 years. It's not that long from now. So on the city level, local level, there is already this movement happening. On the national level, you know, we're going to wait a few years, and then we're going to see.
Because one of the counter-arguments of people who don't want to, as you say, phase out coal and nuclear plants and this energy is employment in a certain part of the economy. Do you think it's possible to, you know, pass to this level of renewable energy, maybe to train people and to get that them into that economy and not to lose that much job? Because that's the argument of President Trump. That's the argument of many lobby who are pro fossil energy. What's your take on that? You know, linking economy with renewable energy.
Well, definitely the clean economy is the well, I would say it is the way, but also there are lots of jobs created there. And we are not only talking about just renewable energy production there, because of course, if you look at just directly production of from renewable energy production from fossils, there is less jobs by definition like that. However, again, there is energy efficiency improvements which need to be done, and it's the jobs for the decades and decades. And that's lots of technicians, energy managers, energy auditors all around Ukraine. This is all the jobs that have to be created. So these are tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, really many. Then renewables, we already have one plant in Ukraine which produces wind turbines in Kramatorsk. And all of we have huge industries, right, which work with metals. And why not producing own renewable technical installations? And now, actually, just a week ago, right, we also had first quite a large-scale solar PV power plant opened also in Ukraine, in Vinnytsia city. And they want to increase also the capacity of their production quite soon. So it means that there will be, production, there will be demand, and they have at this power plant they have at least 150 people working now, and they're going to be more. So this is production of equipment. This is the resale of equipment and so on, and lots of jobs just on the chain.
All the parallel jobs.
And plus there is lots of other things, of course, which are attached to this. This is IT sector and so on. And I would just want to give you one example of Germany, where, of course, the energy transition is happening with really large steps. And for now, Germany had as many coal miners in Ukraine one day. It was more than 100,000. Ukraine has now up to 200,000 still coal miners. For now, in Germany, there is only 20,000 left. They actually had all these programs, to make sure that coal miners are not just left aside, but also,
to integrate them into the transformation system.
And some of them, of course, became engineers working for renewable installations. So there's the 20,000 left of the coal miners. However, there is now hundreds of thousands of people involved in the renewable sector, which is just exploding. And these are the jobs, this is also production of the equipment which can be also exported in the end. So it's a big development of economy. Of course, we have to think of it in that way. We don't have to be just focused on saying, we are losing jobs. It's not the case, because actually nobody has calculated what could happen for Ukraine.
And now to conclude this interview, soon there's going to be elections, presidential elections in Ukraine, how to ensure that these reforms, which are important, the green energy reforms, which are long-term reforms, are and will stay implemented, whoever is elected, how to be sure that the next candidate won't say like, okay, you know what, just let's switch to something else.
Well, it's hard to say how. For sure, there will be civil society still. We will be there. The presidents may change. We'll be there to remind. But at the same time, I think that no reforms would have happened without our international partners, without the EU agreement, which actually had all of these directives had to be implemented and also included on energy efficiency, climate policies, and so on. So without this pressure, it would not have happened. And I think this pressure would continue. Which is, I think, a good thing, no matter who would come into power. And some of the things that already happened, some of the laws which were adopted, luckily, I think there is no way to change them anymore. So at least in the energy efficiency sector, we started this inertia, and with the new jobs, again, energy auditors and so on, so energy managers and energy efficiency fund, which should be established very, very soon. So with that, no matter again who comes, it would keep working. But of course, it's very important to keep moving. And for that, well, we also need, after the presidential elections, we also need a good parliament. So we also would have to vote. And I would really call everybody, all the Ukrainians, to vote, to check, especially those who are living abroad, to definitely vote, to check the programs of the candidates, to see who is supporting good climate policies.
Okay. Well, thank you for this call. It was a pleasure to have you in the studio today to talk about climate change and all its danger. That was Anna Ackermann, Head of Climate Department at the Center for Environmental Initiatives, Ecoaction NGO. Thank you for watching the program and stay tuned for the rest.